The Supreme Court is allowing the Trump administration to fire 16,000 probationary federal workers for now. The decision rescinds a lower court order that those workers be reinstated as the legal battle plays out. Let's bring in senior Washington reporter Devin Dwyer for more. Devin, what went into this decision?
Diane, this was a challenge brought by 9 labor unions for federal employees and a bunch of nonprofit groups. They had sought to challenge the dismissal of roughly 16,000 probationary workers. Those are federal workers who have been on the job for less than a year. They were dismissed en masse in the early days of the Trump administration. A number of those groups said that was done illegally by the Office of Personnel Management, simply dismissed across the board. A federal district court judge put a hold on those, said the Trump administration needed to reinstate those workers, that it was likely illegal the way that they were fired. But today the Supreme Court reversed that decision. It's whiplash here in Washington, Diane, and that now the Trump administration can proceed with the termination of those workers. The judges basically at the lower court, Diane, never questioned the government's power to fire these workers. It was just how it was done. But the Supreme Court today said actually these labor unions don't have standing to even take on that challenge. They said that these groups had not shown enough evidence that they are directly harmed to be able to bring this case. And so for now, even as the litigation moves forward, these workers will be off the job effective immediately going forward, Diane.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So once again, we got to talk about President Trump picking up yet again another victory from the Supreme Court, as we have a constitutional crisis going on in this country, right? We have a bunch of activist judges at the district court level that think that they're the president, right? They think that they should be running the executive branch. And they basically tried to challenge everything that President Trump has done as the commander-in-chief, because, again, they don't feel like the president should actually be able to be the president, okay? And that means that the president should not be able to fire employees that work under his authority, right? I mean, he is the commander-in-chief, right? He runs the executive branch, but apparently he doesn't have the ability to mass fire employees, to conduct mass firings, according to a liberal activist judge who basically has tried to block President Trump from firing several thousand probationary federal employees. But now the Supreme Court has lifted that ban, right? They're saying, no, judge, stay in your lane. The president can, in fact, do this, okay, at least for now. So I want to react to CNN coping over President Trump getting another victory from the Supreme Court.
Breaking news at the Supreme Court. It just handed President Trump another win, allowing his administration to fire hundreds of probationary federal workers. I want to get straight to Paula Reed, who was looking through the decision. Paula, what did they say?
So, Dana, this is a significant win for the administration. The fourth one they have notched from the Supreme Court in just the past few days. Here, this decision is focused on thousands of fired probationary federal workers. Now, this decision will allow the government to keep those individuals off the payroll while the larger questions about these firings are litigated. Now, this was decided not on a constitutional issue or really on the merits. It was decided on something called standing, which is whether the individuals who brought this lawsuit had the right to do so. And here the court says that the 9 nonprofit organizations did not have standing in this case. So again, this is sort of a technical win, but it is still a win for the administration, though it's unclear how this will apply to all fired probationary workers, because a separate judge in Maryland earlier this month ordered a pause and a reinstatement of some employees that are not covered by this case. But I do want to say, Dana, the Justice Department, the Trump administration, they've been waiting for a while for good news from the courts after a string of losses, and they have been getting a lot of good news from the high court over the past few days.
Yeah, I mean, well, it was obvious that they were going to win some of these challenges, because these judges, they were acting out of Trump derangement, right? Not based off the law, right? Not based off anything that actually makes sense. They literally are just being activists trying to stop President Trump's agenda, right? They were freaking out about President Trump and the speed in which he was doing things. So they decided that they had to jump in and to try to take control of the executive branch, right? I mean, this is clear overreach from the judicial branch, and the Supreme Court once again is slapping down these lower court judges, letting them know, hey, stay in your place, right? Stay in your place. You're not us, okay? You're not in a position to try to overrule the executive branch, right? Or to try to interfere with what they're doing. Okay. These cases have to come to us. Okay. We have to handle that. Right. So in this case, right, you had these liberal nonprofits who basically argued that they were harmed. Right. This is how silly of an argument they were making. Right. You had these liberal nonprofits that said, hey, we're being harmed because these employees being fired means that we're going to make less money, right? AKA they're admitting that these employees, right, at the federal government were funneling money to these liberal nonprofits. And because they don't have their contacts there, right, to get taxpayer dollars, right, to have taxpayer dollars funneled to them to do these woke projects that don't really do a damn bit of benefit to society, they argued that they were harmed, right? And they joined in on a lawsuit. And the Supreme Court basically is now lifting this order from the lower court to block the firings due to the fact that these liberal nonprofits did not have standing, right? They didn't have any real reason to be joining in on this lawsuit. So again, it kind of backfired, right? Them getting on board with this lawsuit, it gave the Trump administration a lane to come in and say, hold on. These people don't have standing, right? They should not be a part of this. They're not being harmed. And that's basically the gist of what's going on here.
Okay, Paula, stand by because I do want to come back to you in a short while about other topics the Supreme Court is dealing with explicitly, immigration. But first, I want to talk about this breaking news with the terrific group of reporters with me today. CNN's Jamie Gangel, Zolan Kano-Youngs of the New York Times, and Leanne Caldwell of Puck. Okay, so transparency, we literally just got this in. We're looking at it right now. We did hear from the great Paula Reed explaining it. Jamie, I'm going to go to the daughter of a judge right now. Right. Not a Supreme Court justice, but she might as well be.
Still very important.
Very important. And I do think, obviously, a win is a win.
Right.
Having said that, this isn't the final word from the Supreme Court on that very crucial question about whether or not the Trump administration has the right to fire the probationary employees as they did.
Correct. So we are going inch by inch, step by step through the courts. It is a win today. Big picture, we're going to have to wait and see. I just want to go 30,000 feet for a moment and talk about the context of this, though. When you get a ruling like this and these people have been told that they're not going to get paid when they're on leave, there's a reality. They have to go out and find another job. So at least for most of these people, this is pushing them out of government. It is a brain drain. Probationary employees are not just young people coming in for the first time. They can be extremely experienced. A lawyer for 20 years who's just taken a new job in the government.
See, I find it always to be fascinating how they want to cry sad sob stories for individuals who likely are primarily liberal being fired from the government, right? But yet, where were these stories when you had the Democrats forcing mass firings across the country during the pandemic for people who refused to take an experimental vaccine, right? People who say, you know what, I don't know if I want to put this in my body right now. Maybe I want to wait and see, right? I want some time to see how all this is going to play out, right? In the long term, okay? And no, they were not given that opportunity. A lot of people lost their jobs, lost their livelihoods, okay, wrongfully so. And none of these people were upset about it. In fact, the mainstream liberal media was cheering it on, right? You were a vaccine denier, a science denier, a crackpot, right? If you didn't want to take the vaccine, and you deserved it. You deserved to lose your income, right? The ability to feed your family, your livelihood, because you didn't want to take an experimental vaccine, right? That was the narrative. You are a bad person if you don't take the vaccine, right? This is what they put out here. And then they want us to feel bad about these government firings when, again, they were cheering on firings just a few years ago. Again, it's amazing how that works. Absolutely amazing.
Government. So, the sources I've talked to across the government are really concerned, once again, that when something like this happens, federal workers are not the enemy. We are losing experience and expertise.
Yeah, I'm so glad you
We're not losing anything, because if they have skills, okay, then they can go work in the private sector, right? We're not losing anything. Okay, we have enough federal employees. We don't need to keep bloating the government, right? That was the problem with the Biden administration. We had too many people doing useless jobs that don't actually contribute to any real productivity or anything like that. And that is part of the reason why we had inflation, mass inflation, right? So there are plenty of jobs that will be available for them in the private sector as President Trump brings jobs back to this country. Remember, Democrats said that we need people to pick our cotton because of the mass deportation of illegal immigrants. So those federal workers can go pick cotton, right? I mean, I'm just saying there are jobs. There are things out there for them to do. This is not a waste, okay? We're not losing anything. If anything, we're gaining, right? We're gaining from this.
Mentioned that this isn't just 20-somethings who just graduated from college and are in for their first job. There are a lot of people who were hired recently from the private sector, many of whom took a big pay cut in order to work in the public sector. And what we are talking about here is about 16,000 people, 16,000 probationary employees who lost their jobs as part of these cuts. I also want to add that there were 2 liberal justices who publicly dissented, Sonia Mayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Yeah, also with probationary workers, sometimes it's also people who just got promotions who were previously in the government or had worked in the government and they were promoted and then lost their jobs because of this. But, when we were hearing about this case before we came on air, this is part of the administration's plan. They knew that there were going to be lawsuits, many of them. They knew that they were going to go through the courts, but they were very confident that the Supreme Court was going to side with them in many cases. And so this is the second day in a row that has happened. And so you have to imagine that the administration is feeling very good right now.
Also just part of a broader strategy to make things tougher for the federal workforce as they try to cut the federal bureaucracy and downsize it. That's not just done through putting people on leave, but pursuing actions that make people uncomfortable to the point where they leave voluntarily as well. And you may leave voluntarily if you're not getting paid.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Paula Reed because, as I mentioned, there is.
Yeah, so you see that, you heard that. Another W, right? Another W for the Trump administration. Now, there are other cases that have to work their way through the courts, right? And this is a W, but it's a temporary W, at least for now, okay? But I will take the W's when I can get them, okay? I never get tired of eating W's. Guys, you remember just a few months ago when we were eating W's every single day, right? I was getting full, right? I was getting fat. Now I'm starting to lose some weight because although the W's are still coming, they're not coming as frequently as they were before, right? But again, we still gonna take the W's, right? When we get the W's, we still gonna take the W's. We gonna appreciate the W's. We gonna love the W's, right? We gonna enjoy the W's, right? And I definitely am enjoying some of the W's right now via the Supreme Court. It is still a big problem though with Amy Coney Barrett, which means that some of these cases probably won't work out in our favor. Okay, we will probably have to take a few L's on some of these cases because we have a turncoat on the court, right? We already knew John Roberts. He basically is a liberal, right? But damn, Amy Coney Barrett is a huge disappointment, right? She is one of the biggest disappointments from President Trump's first administration. And again, this is why you just don't do DEI, right? This is why we got to be honest. Amy Coney Barrett was DEI. And we have learned our lesson about the dangers of DEI. It backfired on us, okay, when we tried that. This is why we shouldn't be doing it, right? This is exactly why we should not be doing it. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.